webinar. Today, we're super excited to talk about cybersecurity insurance. Kind of an interesting topic and one that you won't hear Danny and I talk about a lot. We're talking all the time about cybersecurity. But the reality of cybersecurity is that no matter what solutions we put in place, we can't guarantee that we can eliminate risk to zero. And so that's where cybersecurity insurance really comes in to help kind of bridge that gap. And we're super excited to have with us today Will Brooks from Fifth Wall Solutions. Will is the channel chief there working with managed service providers like i.t.NOW to help provide cybersecurity insurance to our clients and really anyone who has a need for cybersecurity insurance solutions. Something we definitely recommend looking into if you guys haven't had a chance to look into it for your business yet. A little bit of a bio for Will as we get started here. So this is his bio. He says, from humble origins as a traditional property and casualty insurance broker to the Fifth Wall Solutions MSP channel chief, solely focused on the dynamic realm of cybersecurity insurance, Will's career path reflects his care for others combined with an unwavering fascination with technological trends and cybersecurity. Passionate about education, Will utilizes his interests and experiences to simplify the complexities of cybersecurity insurance through webinars, public speaking events, podcasts, live streams, and roundtable discussions. Based on Long Island, Will enjoys exploring new cozy hangouts and beach spots with his family, collecting retro video games, and taking things apart to see how they work. So with that introduction, I'd love to pass it over to our presenter today, Will Brooks. Thank you for being here, Will. I'm excited to have you and learn from you a little bit more about cybersecurity insurance today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you all bringing me on today. I know insurance tends to not be the most exciting topic in the world. And like it said in my bio, I used to work in traditional property and casualty. So I was selling everything from auto and home and general liability and workers' comp and all that fun stuff. And I use fun lightly because it was extremely boring for me. I did not enjoy it, and I feel like it was just um, a lot of applications and legal red tape and all this kind of stuff. And cyber insurance felt like it was kind of going in that direction for a while, and it's kind of pivoted. And we're going to get into that because it's not like our traditional insurance. It doesn't behave the same way as traditional insurance. It doesn't, the application process, a lot of carriers have tried to kind of mimic general applications, but at the end of the day, for any of you who currently have cyber insurance, and as long as it's a good policy, and we'll get into that, any of you who have a good cyber insurance policy have gone through the modern day application process for it, and it's anything but traditional and simple. And the goal here is a Rachel, that's right. Insurance is great, especially when you need it, and you definitely want to have it before you need it, not after the fact. So that's a great point. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how cybersecurity and why i.t.NOW is looking at a cyber insurance company and saying, oh, we need to have this conversation in a deeper way. Because at the end of the day, what once used to kind of be two separate fields have merged in a way that helped develop an overall cyber strategy. So we want to get into the details there. But before I do that, just a real quick thing about who Fifth Wall is. So who's this guy, Will? What the heck is Fifth Wall Solutions? We are a distributor of cyber insurance. You can kind of, in the traditional insurance space, we're considered a wholesaler. What that really means is we have access to a ton of carriers. But what makes us unique is the only thing we do is cyber insurance. So we're not doing workers' comp, we're not doing home and auto, we're not doing those things because our focus is solely on working with companies like i.t.NOW to say, let's make cyber insurance a lot easier and a lot more accessible because it's a little ridiculous right now. So we focus on that, we focus on how the two things are linked together, and then because we access all of these carriers, it allows us to really get straight up early information around cyber insurance. So if you I don't know how many of you have run into this in the past, but there have been many times where you have a policy, everything's good, it comes up for renewal, and now you're told you're being non-renewed by your carrier because whatever reason that is, right? This happens in cyber insurance a lot more than it does in other lines of business. And that's usually because carrier appetites change pretty frequently. So we want to know that early so that we can make our clients aware and help our MSPs brief their clients on whether or not some changes need to be made in order to maintain their risk posture. So that's really where our focus is. So here's what we're going to cover today: the cyber insurance landscape. So how we got here and what we're looking at today, what you really need to know about cyber insurance as a business owner, how your cybersecurity and cyber insurance work together, and then ultimately why all this really matters, because it's important for us to walk away with the understanding of, okay, there's this insurance guy. Insurance guys tend to be pretty slimy. He's probably just trying to sell me something. That's actually not the case today. I'm not going to try to sell you anything. What I want you to understand is how important a comprehensive cyber strategy is and what all the players are in that, rather than looking at it as all separate pieces that don't connect. And we want to weave those all together. But before I get into all this fun stuff, for those of you who are here on the webinar, if you don't mind typing in the chat, do you currently have cyber insurance? Just yes or no. That's all you have to do. Or you can do a thumbs up or anything like that. Or have you gone through the cyber insurance conversation? Oh, I like these answers. These are great answers. I like seeing yes. This makes me happy. So, that's a good thing. So we live in a world now where cyber insurance is way more important than it used to be. And not that it wasn't necessary, but back before the pandemic, the types of vectors and ways that criminals were getting into systems was not as elaborate as it is now. And we didn't have as many companies doing the whole work from home thing, people using their personal machines. A lot has changed in just 4 or 5 years. 5 years now? Geez, 2025, that hit. So 5 years, a lot has changed. And a lot of this stuff existed prior to the pandemic, but it has increased a lot since then. So you have social engineering, which if you ever get those emails from your CEO or from your CFO, quote unquote, saying, "Hey, I need you to go buy some gift cards," or "Hey, text me because I'm in this meeting right now and I can't talk," right? They're trying to pretend to be someone else in order to get you to do something, in order to get you to send them money. Ransomware is the really popular one right now. And by popular, I mean it's talked about a lot. Ransomware is, you get that scary warning screen on your monitor, and it says you can't use your computer, you're locked out, all your data has been stolen, and unless you pay a ransom, you're not getting any of it back. So that's the big one. Vulnerability exploits, that's something that IT Now hopefully helps you deal with so that they aren't a thing. But vulnerability exploits are like, hey, let's say you downloaded I don't know, Slack onto your computer because your whole company uses Slack, and then, a week later, something happens where a vulnerability is discovered, meaning bad guys can get in through some back door that they discovered, so it has to be patched out, right? And that's kind of the idea there. And then credential theft is it kind of goes along with social engineering sometimes, but sometimes you click a link, something happens where they're able to actually get your login data, and that's why things like MFA are so important. So there's a lot of these attack vectors, and then on top of that, something I don't have in the presentation, but it's happened so uh, often over the past year that it is worth mentioning, and that's called dependent network interruption, and that's a coverage that you find on a policy. But the interesting thing about that is that's not something that that i.t.NOW can ultimately help protect you from, because that's not a security threat against you. It's saying, hey, you have a vendor who you're using. So let's say Slack, for example. Slack's not a good example. Let's say you're a public school, right? And you're using PowerSchool. PowerSchool is a platform that allows schools to manage student data, student records, payroll even. There's a lot they can do with it. Well, a couple weeks ago, PowerSchool was hit with a cyber attack and went down. So you had all these schools that could not function and could not do certain things and actually lost a lot of data because of it, which had nothing to do with their security. They may have had great security, but because they were using a vendor that went down, now all of a sudden they're running into issues, right? So that's another attack. We'll call it an attack vector that is being utilized where businesses are being disrupted because some vendor they were using went down, right? And a good cyber insurance policy even covers something like that, right? So that's where we have to understand that just because you have really good security doesn't mean you're immune to cyber attacks, like Mike said. And then on top of that, it doesn't mean the vendor you're using are immune to cyber attacks that can then affect you. So it's just becomes this ripple effect. And we want to make sure all of those different avenues are covered and understood so that we can really help the cyber resilience posture. So how did we get to where we are today? Pretty briefly, I'd mentioned this before. From 20, can you guys see my mouse if I do this? Does it show up?
Yes,
Okay,
we
so from
can.
2015 to 2018, cyber insurance was really cheap. I mean, we actually like to say it's kind of like if you were watching an episode of Oprah and you just found a cyber insurance policy under your chair because it was so easy to get. There was no application. All you had to show a carrier was that you had a physical address, website, and revenue. If you had those three things, they would say, "Great, we're going to give you a cyber policy for up to $1 million. It's going to cover you from all this stuff." And then the pandemic happened in 2019. So you had all these companies who had $1 million cyber policies who then cashed in on them because they all got hacked because none of them had good security because it wasn't required of them to get a cyber insurance policy. So carriers started losing a ton of money and they all started saying there was some data that came out around carriers and they actually had like double the loss than they had income from policies that year. So it's like imagine you made 50 grand on cyber insurance policies that year, but you paid out 100 grand on claims. Like it was that bad. I mean, it was way more than that. It wasn't just 100 grand, but it was way more than that. But it was significant. And that's where you started to see these applications in 2020 that got a lot longer. So it went from, hey, answer these three questions to maybe asking if you had MFA. I don't know if you remember those days. It just said, hey, do you have MFA? As if it was this broad blanket term. There's this thing you had, right? And that was the only question. But then another year goes by and all of a sudden it's this laundry list, maybe 14 questions. And then another year goes by and now you have a 14-page application to get cyber insurance. And it's asking all these questions that you're then turning to Mike and you're saying, Mike, I don't know what any of this stuff means. Can you answer this for me? Right? It got really complex and complicated. And there was a reason for that because if we don't have the correct answers on those applications. And then forensics comes in during a cyber incident and does their investigation, and they determine that the reason the incident happened was because a security control that you claimed you had enabled was actually not enabled. Well, now we run into issues, right? Because they're saying that's actually a breach of contract. You misrepresented your security posture. So we want to be as accurate as possible when we get those applications filled out. And part of the reason, and I don't know if I really have to go into this all that much because all of you apparently have cyber insurance, which is amazing. But we always assume breach, assume incident, which is the mindset of it's when, not if. And that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, you're definitely going to experience a cyber incident. But I guarantee every single one of you at this point has seen a phishing email or seen some sort of text message or seen something that you're like, that's definitely fishy. That's suspicious. I'm not going to click on that. Hopefully you didn't click on it. Or I'm not going to go buy those gift cards. Hopefully you didn't buy those gift cards. But if you did, again, assume breach, assume incident. That's kind of the mentality we have to have in today's world. There is I'm going to say a speculation because there's no hard data because it's all thinking forward, but it's speculated that cyber insurance premiums in total premium, like people buying cyber insurance, is going to surpass commercial property by like 2032, which is wild because commercial property has forever been the most lucrative cyber or insurance industry. And now cyber is saying this is becoming more important. Think of the number of businesses that have downsized their actual business space because more of their workers are remote now. Think of how many businesses are just fully remote now, right? There is more of a threat to our systems than to our buildings nowadays. A lot of us don't even have buildings anymore. So that's the reality that our entirety of our business is done online. So we have to be preparing ourselves, protecting ourselves, and also preparing ourselves to be able to withstand the blast radius of an incident. And that's what cyber resilience is all about. So I'm going to just read this verbatim. I don't usually read off slides directly, but the measure of your business ability to continue operations despite adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises. I don't know why there's a question mark there. Cyber resilience exists when cybersecurity, business continuity, and organized incident response work together. So that's if you're going to walk away from one thing, if you have not experienced a cyber incident before, There is business downtime during a cyber incident, almost always, right? It may not be super long. For ransomware, the average ransomware downtime is anywhere between 14 and 16 days because there's a lot of investigation that needs to be done. Now, a lot of companies are getting better at saying, "Hey, we're going to sandbox you, we're going to put you in a new environment while the investigation is done." But at the end of the day, getting back onto your original system often takes about 2 weeks. So the reality is, with all of that, we need to understand that business continuity needs to keep happening, right? We can't just not work for 2 weeks. So that's where i.t.NOW, that's where the insurance company is going to come in and actually help fund some of the loss of income during that time. That's where you're going to have investigations happen. I actually posted on LinkedIn today about the challenges of going through an incident because it does take time and we can't just flip the switch. I mean, it's like if you were a housekeeper at a hotel and you walked in to some room to clean up and there's a body on the floor. You don't just immediately start cleaning up around the body and doing everything. You're tampering with a crime scene. And we have to think of our networks when we're undergoing an incident similar to that. It is a crime scene. So we can't just tamper with it. We can't just fix all the issues. We can't put band-aids on it. We have to wait until the investigation is done. And that's how all those pieces work together. So what does that investigation look like, and why can't i.t.NOW just restore your systems from scratch right away? Like, oh, or not from scratch, from backups. We're gonna use backups, but restore your systems from backups right away. It's because a lot has to happen. So you have an incident. i.t.NOW detects an incident. They call you up, say, "Hey, we got to work on this right now." So you're gonna call your lawyer and call your insurance company. Those are like the first two things you want to get done, right? So you're going to call that insurance. Well, let me backtrack. i.t.NOW for you, Mike, for you listening in here. Isolate and contain, always a good move. So stop the spread of the threat actor. That's a really good thing, right? Because no insurance carrier is going to look at what you're doing and say, "Oh, I'm really upset that you actually made it so I don't have to pay as much on this claim." Like that's never going to happen, right? So if you can stop the spread of the incident, great. Then you want to get legal, you want to get your insurance company on the line so that they can begin their investigation. And the first thing they're going to do is send in a forensics team to come in and determine what exactly happened, right? And that's a digital forensics team, and they're going to look at they're going to look at the full scope of the incident. And that's why it's so important that we can't just immediately restore systems, because if something happened and we restore the system and delete potential information that tells us just how far reaching this incident is, it could be really bad for both you as a business and your claim being paid out. And the reason it can be bad for you as a business is if you look at a lot of these things, there's notification, there's public relations, there's credit monitoring. You have sensitive data on your systems, whether you think so or not, right? We all have sensitive data. And if that sensitive data gets leaked, well, now we have to notify people that that potentially has happened. We need to offer credit monitoring. We need to have our image taken care of as a business, right? And the beauty of this is that the insurance carrier is going to provide all of that stuff. Whereas if you don't have insurance, you're on the hook for figuring that all out yourself. And that's tough because when you're in the midst of an incident, you're going through the middle of a cyber attack. The last thing you're going to want to do is find some PR company to help manage your image. The last thing you're going to do is figure out how you're supposed to follow the notification laws of your state or to monitor or offer credit monitoring for your clients, right? That's all going to happen in the background by your insurance company so you don't have to manage it. And that's really helpful because your focus needs to be maintaining the business you can maintain while this is all happening. Um, so just to pause really quick, um, has anyone ever had to go through any sort of cyber incident before? You don't have to go into details, just yes or no. Curious if you've had to deal with this. Um, Rachel, I'm sorry you've had to deal with it, but hopefully you had, oh my goodness, everyone. Hopefully hopefully you had insurance prior to, but if not, I'm glad you have it now. It can get real messy. And it's challenging to go through. And as you look through this, there's so many components to it that don't just mean I need to get my business back up and running again. So we want to make sure that you're covered for all those things. And that's where insurance comes in. Now, this is where things get kind of nerdy, and I'm going to keep it not nerdy. My hope is that all of you who said yes to having insurance have on the right side comprehensive coverage. I'm going to go into real quick about what the difference is because For smaller businesses, there's a type of policy that you can have called a business owner's policy. A BOP is the for shorthand. And business owner policies often have a bunch of like lines of coverage built into it to help the small business owner kind of have that comprehensive policy that they need to have. A lot of times, a BOP has a cyber endorsement or a cyber add-on built into it, and it tends not to be very good. The limits are below $100,000, which basically means if you have an incident, you're probably covered at most to $100,000 for that incident. And if we go back to this previous slide, that's all going to be used up by like the forensics fraud response component. This isn't even getting into the business recovery aspect. This is all stuff that has to happen before the business recovery, right? And that's all going to get used up real fast. And those endorsements aren't really meant to pay claims. They're really meant to just kind of put a band-aid on something. They're super low cost. Of like, hey, do you want to add cyber coverage for $30 or $100 or $300? Like if an agent ever asks you, do you just want to add some cyber coverage? It's only like $200 extra. That's not the kind of policy you want to have. It sounds enticing. Oh, cyber's scary. I want to add it. But really, what you need is a comprehensive or standalone cyber insurance policy. I'm going to get into what the specific limits are, but those are actually designed to pay claims and they're designed to cover kind of the gamut of things that a company will experience in the midst of a cyber incident. You may not experience all those things in every cyber incident, but you want to have kind of all the lines of coverage of things that you might encounter during a cyber incident so that all of that's covered. The endorsement policies tend to exclude a lot of those additional things. We want to make sure all of that's there so that should you encounter any of those different obstacles during an incident, you know there's coverage for that. So we're going to get into some of those really quick. But recognize that this type of policy does cost money. Like it's not cheap. It used to be. It used to be less than $1,000. Now we're depending on the size of your business, depending on your revenue, depending on, unfortunately, depending on the loss history of not you as a business, but of your industry in general, all that stuff affects pricing, right? So if you have a really common one, manufacturers, right? If I'm a manufacturer or a construction company, right? I'm looking at my equipment. I'm saying, well, I just have all this equipment. Yeah, some of it's connected to the internet, but it's not like I'm sitting on my computer all day. I'm out there working or I'm in the factory working. I'm doing these things, X, Y, and Z. But even that stuff, if it's connected to the internet, it's considered a thing, or in the Internet of Things, there is potentially a gateway into your company's network even through that stuff. So it gets really complex and it gets crazy. And even so construction companies and manufacturers got hit really hard and have been getting hit really hard because they don't really understand. Um, Sometimes they put up a fight as to why they might need good security or things like that because it doesn't tend to be kind of your sit down at a desk kind of job. So I'm not going to go into all of this in super detail, but there's really three sections here that I want to hit on, right? The first is your liability, so third party coverages, meaning this is the kind of stuff that's going to help cover the other people. So if you have clients who have their data lost because of this incident, if um, you have to pay fines because you had an incident, you have to notify people, like I said, credit monitoring stuff. I mean, some of that's down here, but that's the kind of stuff that's going to kick in. Then you have what's down here. A lot of this is the green is your first party coverages. And what that ultimately means is that's the stuff that's going to help you as a business, right? It's going to be stuff that covers your business. And like I said, you might not experience all this. If you're not experiencing a ransomware attack, this ransomware and extortion loss coverage isn't going to click in or kick in, right? But if the reason that you had an incident is because, like I said before, dependent network interruption, your vendor went down. Well, now you want to make sure that that's on there. And this says $100,000 and up. Um, Unfortunately, $100,000 is not a lot of money in the cyber incident world. So, what we really like to see on these policies is that reaching the full limit of insurance, which is $1 million. Because I mean, if your business is down for 10 days because a software company that you use goes out, you're going to want to make sure that your income is supported during that time, and that's the kind of stuff that helps. And you also have things like business interruption and recovery, reputational damage. So those two kind of work in hand. Business interruption is while your network is down, you're getting coverage. The other side of that is reputational damage. Let's say 3 months from now, because you underwent a cyber incident, you start to lose clients or you're not getting new clients because of it on a normal cadence that you would be. There's income that the insurance carrier will actually help cover some of that loss of income in that case too. So it's a kind of 6 months to a year out additional cushion in the event that that reputation kind of takes a hit as you rebuild it over the course of a couple years. I mean, and unfortunately, it's not like, Uber gets hit with a cyber attack and we look at Uber and we're like, well, I'm still going to use Uber. But a small business gets hit with a cyber attack and now you're playing serious damage control because there's another competitor down the street who didn't undergo a cyber attack, right? I'm not going to go use Lyft just because Uber had a cyber attack when all of my, when all of my stuff's in Uber already. But if I have to move my stuff from one business to another locally, that's a lot easier for me to do. So, um, that's where things like reputational damage come in. The last one is these are your cybercrime coverages, and these are often not at the full limit of insurance, and that's a really important one because this is all money's lost, right? This is actual money lost to e-theft, which means maybe I'm a bad guy and I call up your payroll department pretending to be Brandon, right? And I say, "Oh, I'm Brandon. I need to change my payroll information because I have a new bank account." They don't do anything to verify it, and now I get Brandon's paycheck this week, right? That's e-theft. That's funds transfer. That's the kind of stuff where used the web, digital, to steal money from your company, right? Social engineering kind of builds into that. We went over that one before. Telephone fraud and cryptojacking actually go together, and what that utility fraud, you might see it on your policy as. That one's really interesting because it's literally saying I got onto your network and then I did things to spike your utility bills as I mined for cryptocurrency or I did weird things like that, right? Like I'm literally using your business's resources to mine Bitcoin so that I can make money. Like it's crazy what people are doing. And then invoice manipulation is external, so it's like now I'm Rachel, right? And I'm going to send an invoice to one of my clients. I'm Rachel. I'm actually Will in his basement, but I'm pretending to be Rachel. And I send an invoice to one of Rachel's clients because I was able to get a hold of her client list through some sort of data leak, right? And now I'm pretending to be her and I spoof an email address that almost looks exactly the same. They pay that invoice and now they come to you and say, "Hey, I paid this invoice. Where's my product?" You're like, "I never sent you an invoice." And they're out, $1,000 for whatever they sold. So that's where that kind of stuff comes in. And we want that to be, again, you're not going to face every single one of these coverages in every cyber incident, but wouldn't you rather be protected for all of them so that the ones you do face, you have coverage for? And typically when you have an incident, $1 million is unfortunately not that much. It gets used up very quickly. So now I want to talk about the other side of things. Um, and before I do that, are there any questions about cyber insurance? I know I'm talking a lot and I can talk about a lot of things because I'm a huge cyber nerd, but if you do you have any questions around things? Are you are there any things you're looking at where you're like, I don't understand this. Can you go into this in more detail? I know we're going to have more time for questions at the end, but I always like to make sure that we're answering them as we go here. And if you do have questions as we're going, please put them in the chat. I will answer them on the fly. You don't have to wait until the end for that. Um, so here's the part where Mike can join in if he wants to a little bit. But this is the intersection component. So up until, like I said, 2020, we had the ability to get a cyber insurance policy really easily. You didn't need to show any proof of security, which is wild to me because that's literally, and to be fair, I know we call it cybersecurity insurance, but back in the day, and technically, it's called cyber liability insurance because it's what you're liable for should you experience a cyber incident. I feel like cybersecurity insurance didn't really become a label until after the cybersecurity was required to get it. And now all of a sudden we're saying, oh, we should align these things together. Like we should call this cybersecurity insurance because ultimately we are insuring your business should something get past that cybersecurity, right? Which happens. You cannot 100%. And unfortunately, I wish I could say by having peak, you could have the best cybersecurity controls in the world, like literally paying, you could be putting like 90% of your company's budget towards good cybersecurity, and you're still not going to entirely eliminate your risk, because the reality is there are things that can happen that have nothing to do, like I said, dependent network interruption is a big one, but there are things that can happen that have nothing to do with your cybersecurity failing. It literally could just be due to some error that we make. So these are the things that if you do not have these, you're going to have a hard time getting affordable cyber insurance. Or when we go back to that list of coverages, a lot of these might be missing because a carrier might look at you and say, well, yeah, you know what? I'll give you a policy, but I'm going to not include a lot of the really common stuff because you're not even doing anything to really protect yourself. Like, why would I take on a risk that isn't doing the work to protect themselves? Think when you think of life insurance, right? Even though life insurance is ridiculous and applying for that, I think, is worse than cyber. At the same time, life insurance asks all these questions and looks into your health and how you take care of yourself, and they're willing to offer you better options should you be taking care of yourself, right? It's the same thing with cyber. Hey, we're going to offer you better premiums. We're going to offer you better options if you're taking care of your business and preemptively protecting yourself. So when you look at the 5 must-have security controls, the first one is multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, verifying when you log in. And I like to say, I put where exactly because honestly, I like to say anywhere you can enable it. And this is not just because it could lead, like you could say, well, why do I have to enable that on, why do I have to enable that on my podcasting app? Like, I don't care about that. Like, no one's going to go in there and steal data from my pod. Like, there's nothing in there to steal. But at the same time, imagine you're housing 30 hours of recorded podcasts on some cloud service. You don't have MFA. A threat actor gets in there and all he does is change your password so you can't access it anymore. Right? It's like there might not have been sensitive data there, but that's 30 hours of recording out the window. You can't use it anymore. A very personal more personalized side of this is I don't know if you've had friends who have gone through this, but my brother-in-law went through it where it's like you get a message in your Instagram DMs and you click on a link, and now the threat actor has access to your entire Instagram account, changes your password, locks you out, and then starts phishing people using your Instagram account, right? Like this stuff is this that has nothing to do with your private data, but at the end of the day, because it's on Instagram, it's all public anyway, but at the end of the day, now you have someone impersonating you using your actual account. So MFA, anywhere you can enable it, and especially in places where there is that private data. Email, you want to avoid your email being compromised. Anything with payroll, anything with HR, all that needs to have MFA. But honestly, if Mike's saying, "Hey, we need to implement MFA," I wouldn't push back. I would just do it. A lot of times it's free anyway. It's just included with what you're using. Um, Segregated backups. I can get into some of the details on what those are, but Mike, do you want to explain kind of what your kind of approach to backups are? So because it's fine.
Yeah, so and I appreciate this, Will, because I think that this is something not everybody thinks about. i.t.NOW has kind of aligned our most basic security package with these things, right? So every single client, if you're a client of i.t.NOW, you're going to get MFA. We're going to help manage that for you. We're going to manage backups. You're going to have EDR, patches, vulnerability management done by us, as well as cybersecurity employee training. Just because we have seen for cybersecurity insurance, it's all you pretty much can't get a policy, or if you can, it's super expensive if you don't have at least some of these kind of a minimum basic security controls in place. As far as backups go specifically, I think the huge thing there is this first word segregated, right? So we've seen over and over again where a company had a backup, they got hit with ransomware, they got hit with some other something, but maybe their backup was on the same network as everything else, and so it got encrypted just like the rest of their data, and they weren't therefore able to recover when they really needed it. And so having a segregated backup that's on a delineated separate network, having a cloud backup as well that's somewhere else and has additional protection on it, um, typically at i.t.NOW, every backup that we do for our client, we're going to have a local and an offsite copy of that backup, and there's segregation between them so that even if they manage to get one, they're not going to have the other, and we can recover our clients every single time. So to keep it simple, without getting super technical, really that's how we manage that.
I love it. Um, and that's such a crucial component. One of the reasons I wanted to toss that over to you, Mike, is again going back to what we were saying at the very beginning of this. When you're going through a cyber incident, there's a lot of stress, and you know that, oh, hey, Mike has these backups. IT now put these backups in place for me. Can't you just restore them? It's like, well, no, we're keeping those safe and we're keeping those secure until we get the okay from the carrier or the forensics company that the investigation is complete, right? But imagine you didn't have that backup. You go through this whole thing and now you're literally starting from scratch because you have nothing. Like backups are so crucial because how are you going to get back up and running, literally back up and running when all of this is said and done? And that's a really crucial component. And you want that disconnected from your network because honestly, if you're just like uploading it to Google Drive or something, the bad guys can have access to that too. Of course, they're going to go in and remove the backups. They don't want you to have access to those. So you want those disconnected from everything else. Endpoint detection and response, EDR. Next gen antivirus is like a thing of the past, but for some reason carriers still ask about it. It really has been lumped into EDR, but really the way to think of endpoint detection and response is like it's your network's version of a home alarm system, right? If someone breaks in, if someone opens the window, we know the window is where the point of entry was. If someone came in through the egress door in your basement, we know that's been the point of entry, right? Like it's not just triggering an alarm that says this is you have a break-in. It's literally triggering an alarm and telling you where the break-in is so that it can be shut off. Now there is more a more advanced version of that called MDR. Some people call it, there's XDR, there's all these DRs, right? But the idea is the difference between just having that alarm system that tells you where the point of entry is and then having, paying that subscription fee to have a literal person watching that at all times so that when that alarm triggers, it can immediately be shut off, right? I mean, if you're thinking of your network, let's say let's say you go home for the day and then you come in the next morning and you find out your EDR has been triggered, but no one was around to shut it off because the hours were, it was off hours. So now there's this guy in another country on a completely different time zone where it's only noon for them who have been playing around on your system for the past 4 hours because that's when they got in. Right. The idea is if you're saying, hey, you know what, my network's safe because I'm not working from 5 p.m. until 8 a.m. the next day. Well, guess what? Most of the threat actors are in countries where that time zone is meaningless to them, right? And so managed detection and response, saying 24 by 7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, my network is being monitored. Highly recommended. And some carriers are looking for it and will actually reward you having it. They'll charge you less for the policy. They'll include some additional coverages. Patching and vulnerability management, we talked about that early on, but you want to be patching consistently because carriers will ask, hey, how often are you patching your systems? Like if a critical vulnerability comes out, if something really bad comes out, how long does it take to patch, right? And carriers look for like within 30 days. I think best practice is within 7. If it's really a critical vulnerability, you should be doing it sooner than that, right? I mean, you don't want if something's really critical that someone can get in really easily, why would you not want to patch it as soon as possible? That's just no brainer to me. Um, but then there's all that, right? All those security controls are helpful, and those are all things that typically happen in the background. You don't really have to deal with MFA. I guess you kind of have to deal with by typing in that code, but there's so many ways to make that so simple today that it really shouldn't be that much of a hassle. But then that point number 5, cybersecurity employee training, and that's like the hitting the nail on the head when I say you could have great security in place, but then one of your employees gets an email that looks like it's from you and it has a link in it and they click it and now all of a sudden bam, your entire system is compromised because one mistake was made. Right? So cybersecurity training needs to be taken seriously and it needs to be done often. Because we need to be able to understand what these emails are looking like and what these attack surfaces are looking like. And unfortunately, with the emergence of AI, they're looking a lot more realistic. Back in the day, 3 years ago, you had an email from a Nigerian prince, quote unquote, come across with really broken English, and clearly this was fake. Now I can go to ChatGPT, generate an email that looks super real, and then I can just put it into a mail merge, send it out to all these contacts who I got information off from the dark web, and it looks like a real email. My Excel sheet has who's the boss, who's the employee, what's the employee's email, and then I just can merge all that into this email that I generated on AI to look like really good English, and then I send it out, right? So it's like there are things we need to be looking for, email addresses that are wrong. We need to be looking for certain patterns of speech. Like it's really important to understand those things, and that's where cybersecurity employee training comes in. You're never going to completely eliminate the risk, but that last component, that employee awareness training, is going to help bring it down a little bit more than it would have been without it, right? And that's what we want. We want to be protecting our businesses as best as we can. Um, Now we've got some additional ones. I did mention 24 by 7 managed EDR. These are I'm going to put a caveat here. These aren't required controls for everybody, but they're going to be required for certain risks. So if you're in a certain revenue tier, if you're of a certain industry, carriers are going to want to see even more security because their past history is saying, this type of business gets hit pretty hard. So we want to make sure they're additionally secured. But also, a lot of these things will often bring down your premium, and I make this caveat, like I said, Fifth Wall has access to over 40 carriers. So what makes that a little different is if you have additional security, that's going to open up more access to carriers who offer better pricing. Like imagine you have a carrier who says, "Yeah, we'll take on any risk. I don't care, but we're just going to charge them a ton of money for it." Whereas you have another carrier who has very strict standards and says, "If they're this good, we're definitely going to take them on and we're going to make sure their premium's low because of it because we know that they're a good risk." Right. So there's that game you play where it's, depending on who your agent is, if they have more access, ask your agent, "Hey, do you go to a wholesaler for cyber insurance?" Because there are a lot of companies that only do cyber insurance who don't work with the local agent directly. So an agent has to go through a wholesaler to access them, right? So what my biggest recommendation for anyone looking for cyber insurance is to ask your agent to exhaust their options and also to like make sure that your local broker, I know they may be your best friend's brother, whatever, of childhood, you've known him for 25 years. That's awesome. But when it comes to your business, make sure that your local broker has someone who's just like wholly dedicated to cyber or at least is like a huge cyber nerd. Right. And then make sure that they're exhausting their options because a lot of times it's easier. Speaking again from the old school property and casualty world, a lot of times it's easier to go to those 3 or 4 companies that I can write direct with, but that might not be the best option for your business. So make sure they're exhausting every option for you, because it's gonna make sure you keep your premiums down and help get you better options and things like that. So I mentioned industries before, and if you're on this list, I apologize because your life is harder now when it comes to cyber insurance. Um, Adult content, crypto, those guys, like they're just hard for them because, well, they're weird. But everything else on here is are businesses that in the past have kind of been reluctant to implement better security, or even with really good security, their risk is so great that it's going to look um, it's going to be expensive. So you look at things like municipalities and schools, for example. I mean, they have local budgets that they have to set on an annual basis. So you have things like that where it just gets into the way of implementing better cybersecurity and things like that. But then at the bottom, unfortunately, Mike, for IT now, IT companies have a hard time, MSPs have a hard time getting insurance, not because it's difficult, but because they're looking at you and they're saying, well, you're managing all these other businesses. What that's scary to us, right? So carriers like to scrutinize your security pretty in depth, probably more so than your clients. But all that's to say, again, if you go back to those other security controls and really make sure that your security is aligned with what carriers are looking for your individual risk, you're going to have a much easier time getting insurance. So just to recap everything here, we want to treat insurance kind of like other security controls that are being offered, right? So it's going to renew on an annual basis. I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I need to do to ensure that that renewal is both affordable and timely. It's really important to that overall cyber strategy because Mike's doing everything he can with IT now to protect you. You're going to have the incident response components. Hey, this is my fire plan in case something goes wrong. and then you're going to have insurance kicking in to say, hey, we're going to help out with this too. So all those three things work together to keep your business both safe and help you recover well. And increasing your security on an annual basis. And it could be little increments, right? But incrementing that security, just better protecting yourself on an annual basis, is ultimately going to lead to making sure that you're continually renewed and seen as an optimal risk to the carrier market, and that's really important. But lastly, if your business can't withstand the blast of a cyber incident, you're not going to be a business anymore, and that's the scary part. Not trying to sell fear or anything like that. It's literally just saying, hey, you have put your blood, sweat, and tears into building this business. This is your livelihood. And the fact that some guy in his basement could literally wipe out your entire existence as a business by just stealing some information is terrible. That is the world we live in right now. It just stinks. Right. So why would you not put the additional resources into protecting yourself, getting the security you need to prevent something like that from happening? And if it does, you have an insurance policy to fall back on that's going to help recover you from that attack. Like that's the mindset here. Is it's less about fear. It's literally saying this is stupid that I have to put so much work into building my business, and this guy can just take it all away in an instant. Like I don't like that. But and because that's a reality, we need to make sure we're doing everything I can to protect our investment. That's what it's all about. So that's I'm gonna skip that. We just talked about that. So that's literally it from a presentation perspective. One thing we do, I want to end, I want to make time for questions here. I told them I'd wrap up 10 to 15 minutes before the hour. So if you do have questions, feel free to ask. We are partnering with i.t.NOW just to offer a free cyber liability review. It's not a commitment to buying a policy or anything like that. Our cyber liability review is just an opportunity for us to look at your current policy and let you know if any of those crucial coverages are missing, or maybe you're not insured to the limit you should be, or whatever like that, just recommendations. We also look at your security to help identify any additional security measures that may help you become a better risk. So it's not it's not saying, oh, you need to go buy these from Mike or you need to buy a policy from us. It's just literally helping to paint a picture of say, hey, what's a roadmap to better continually protect your business and get you to a place where you need to be. And if you don't have a cyber insurance policy or yours is renewing soon and you want to look at options, we can help with that too. But ultimately, we want to help give you that understanding and that knowledge of what you currently have and maybe some milestones of what you could potentially get through in the process. So if you want to do that, you can go to fifthwallsolutions.com/discovery. Make sure that you put Mike's email or whoever the account manager is at i.t.NOW that you work with in there so that you can schedule a call at the end. But that's it for me. Any questions? If you want to type the questions, you can type them because I know sometimes we don't like to go on mic.
Well, guys, thank you everyone for being here today. Really great content, Will. I appreciate your expertise. The way that you presented this is great. I think it's just a really great piece of education. It's all about managing risk for the business, right?
Yeah.
Just understanding where those risks lie and how we're covering them. And really, i.t.NOW works with all kinds of different providers doing cybersecurity insurance, Fifth Wall specifically, just to make sure that our clients have a complete package that's going to help mitigate that risk the best that we can. It's an ugly world, right? And so it's
Thanks.
important for us to just be aware of what those coverages are, what it looks like, what are the exceptions. And so I thank you for kind of pointing some of that stuff out today in a way that's meaningful to everybody. So we
Yeah.
appreciate everyone being here. Thank you so much for your time, and we will wrap it up right here. So thanks a bunch.
Thanks, everybody.